doing advertising back in the 50s and the 60s, those were copywriters. So what they were doing is they were writing something called ad copy. That's the actual letters that appear on an advertisement. So, my dad got me into copywriting actually because he was like, "Hey, you're trying to do this whole professional snowboarder thing," which I was trying to do at the time. It was in the early 2000s. I was living in Salt Lake City, which is like the Hollywood of the snowboard scene. At least it was at the time. And so all I wanted to do was snowboard. I was dreaming about the day that I could afford to get a helicopter and have it drop me off at the top of a mountain in Alaska. And that's not cheap. So my dad's like, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this. You're good at sales. All you really have to be able to do is write a letter. And you have to write it well enough that somebody who just stumbled upon your letter or that you sent it to in the mail would then be able to be convinced to buy the product that you're selling." Yeah, so, as we open up this episode, I wanted to talk about one of the kind of crazier stories that I had when it came to launching my business. So, you've worked with a lot of copywriters. I don't know if the average person listening to this knows what a copywriter is. I think they usually think about putting the C inside of a circle. That's a copywriter, but totally different. So I think the way that I always describe it to people is like if you've ever seen Mad Men and you think about like Madison Avenue, people on doing advertising back in the 50s and the 60s, those were copywriters. So what they were doing is they were writing something called ad copy. That's the actual letters that appear on an advertisement. So, my dad got me into copywriting actually because he was like, "Hey, you're trying to do this whole professional snowboarder thing," which I was trying to do at the time. It was in the early 2000s. I was living in Salt Lake City, which is like the Hollywood of the snowboard scene. At least it was at the time. And so all I wanted to do was snowboard. I was dreaming about the day that I could afford to get a helicopter and have it drop me off at the top of a mountain in Alaska. And that's not cheap. So my dad's like, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this. You're good at sales. All you really have to be able to do is write a letter. And you have to write it well enough that somebody who just stumbled upon your letter or that you sent it to in the mail would then be able to be convinced to buy the product that you're selling." So for a lot of people now, the way that works is they're stumbling upon my video ad for a Vanish holster or a Modern Needs product, and then the actual landing page, which is much shorter than a letter, is the rest of the selling process. And so back then, I was like, okay, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could make a decent living, work 4 hours a day, and snowboard the rest of the time. So the interesting thing about it is I was going to school at the University of Utah, and screw BYU, just for anybody listening. I don't even have to justify why I said that. It's the Holy War, and they can just go to hell. But I was like, okay, so I'm in school for history, but on the same side, I'm also trying to learn this craft because it's becoming apparent that a history major wasn't going to give me what I wanted in life. I could either become a teacher or a lawyer, and I was already sick of school, so I was like, I'm not going to any more school. I'm done. I don't need to be paying for people to teach me things that I could probably learn on my own, and this is long before YouTube University. But I was actually learning how to do this copywriting thing on the side. So I'd be doing my homework, I'd be studying for school, I'd be snowboarding, and then I'm practicing copywriting. And, I did that for a number of years. Graduated, continued copying or doing the copywriting thing, practicing at home, and then would be working, snowboarding, practicing, putting in the Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, if you will, just without getting paid, just trying to learn the craft. And so I think it was 2012, I had reached out to a guy that is still a close friend of mine who was a professional copywriter and lived in Denver. I had made the move from Salt Lake to Denver and reached out to him and kind of asked him if he could be my quote-unquote mentor. He agreed, and then at some point he started to have overflow work, and he's like, "Hey, I think that you could do this. I think that you could probably begin to write for some of the clients that I would be turning away otherwise." And so he began to trust me with some of this work. And I was also kind of trying to find some of the work that I could on my own. This is probably the time where online forums, Upwork were starting, or not forums, but online websites like Upwork were coming around. There was a big thing called Warrior Forum. So for people who are familiar with digital marketing 15 years ago, they're definitely familiar with Warrior Forum. So I was doing this whole piecemeal thing of taking copywriting clients and working on the side and trying to get this career going, because I just knew that like this was the future for me. I had no real other option, and I'd already invested so much time into it that I figured, yeah, this will work. So 2012, I get my first real big client. I can't remember. I think it was probably from my mentor at the time. He's like, hey, these guys are interested in doing a pre-workout supplement for CrossFit, which now is really kind of funny. And I think even then I thought it was a challenge, because if most people are familiar with CrossFit, like pre-workout plus CrossFit is not a good thing unless you want to blow your heart up. But I remember, actually, let me rewind. Like in the fall of 2012, I got a job at a restaurant. So that's what I needed to say. Got a job at a restaurant, one of the better restaurants in the state of Colorado. And I said to myself when I got hired, I was like, okay, I'm going to work here for 6 months. I'm going to keep doing this copywriting thing. And then in 6 months, what I hope is going to happen is I'm going to have $5,000 in my bank account, and I'm going to quit. And I'm never going to wait tables again, because waiting tables is what I had done for like close to a decade while I was working, snowboarding, and learning this thing on the side. And I was just tired of, I was tired of putting on an apron and, looking ridiculous and being mistreated by people for that job. And so I ended up working at that restaurant for 6 months, get this client that I just mentioned, and they happened to pay me exactly $5,000. And it was about three or 4 days before that 6-month anniversary came up. So now I'm into 2013. And I was like, wow, this actually worked out pretty well for me. I guess like I'm on my way to becoming a professional copywriter. And so I quit the job, which was amazing. I remember posting on Facebook, I was like, congratulations to me. I never have to wear an apron again. I'm done waiting tables. And fortunately, that was an accurate prediction. I finished waiting tables 2013, so March 9th of 2013 or something like that. So it's been 11 years since I've had to wait a table. And I start with that client. We try and launch this product. It goes nowhere. It was unfortunate. Nobody knew what they were doing, honestly. It was just like, it was a good idea, and we were trying to make everything work. So that kind of falls through. I start piecing a bunch of small copywriting gigs together, working whatever I could just to make this whole thing happen. And then later in the year, around July of 2013, I ended up working for a guy who owns a real estate investing company, and he does a really good job of finding distressed properties in terrible cities. So like Gary, Indiana, or Jacksonville, Florida, or wherever, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so just places where you can get a cheap house, put 20 grand into it, and flip it. And then he taught people how to do this online, because he's like, this is so easy. Anybody could do it. I'll teach you how to do it. And then he also had software systems that allowed for people to not only learn how to do it, but then they could go do research on a zip code and figure out, is this a good zip code for me to invest in? So he hires me, which was the way that he hired me was actually, I'm very proud of this. It was a Craigslist ad, of course. This is 2013. We're talking about everything was happening on Craigslist at that time. And he posted the ad, and he's like, send me a cover letter and a resume. And my cover letter told him, I was like, why it would be a mistake to read my resume. And then I proceeded to write in the cover letter why he should never look at my resume, because my resume wouldn't tell him that, I just had these bullet points of what I had learned in copywriting and what people had said about my copy and what I'd been able to do, just small little wins. And it ended up being that he had 100 applicants, and he hires me, and then he tells me after he hires me, he's like, I never read your resume. He's like, I have no idea your level of education. I have no idea anything about you other than what your cover letter said. And he's like, that's why I hired you, because your cover letter sold me right there. He's like, the fact that I bypassed reading your cover or your resume because of the strength of your cover letter was why I was like, this guy's a good fit for my company. So I ended up working with him for, I think it was close to 8 months. And I discovered that I wasn't all that thrilled about the industry in particular. He was a decent guy. Decent's not the right word. He was a good guy, but it just wasn't a good fit. There was a little bit of ego there, and at one point, like, he ends up firing me. And he's just like, yeah, this is gonna work out better for both of us. You can collect unemployment, and I go and file for unemployment, and he actually fights it. He's like, he told the unemployment office that I did a bunch of things that were untrue, to be completely honest. But the whole point is, like, during this 8 months of where I'm working with this guy, I end up making a couple decisions around, like, what I'm going to do to better my life. Like, I was 30 years old, single, and I really wanted to get married. And so at some point during this whole 8-month period, I'm like, I'm going to start putting money away to save for a ring for the woman that I end up meeting and will marry. And I had no idea if that was going to be in a year or in 50 years. I figured if it was in 50 years, I was just going to have, like, and I meet some woman and I'm 80, she's going to get the fattest rock ever. I was like, this is going to be great for her. But so I end up meeting a girl, and, like, there's a really cool story there that I don't want to get into here, but I realize, I guess I'm going to marry her, and I end up buying a ring, and I buy the ring and pretty much deplete my savings account about a week before this guy fires me. So I buy the ring, get fired. Yeah, nice, perfect
good timing.
Have no money. He's fighting my unemployment, and now I've got this potential fiance who I actually end up proposing to 2 weeks later, maybe 3 weeks later. And so I'm in a really bad position financially. And what was really cool about this was the faith in God that we've talked about a lot in this podcast was put on display here. It's like, I believe that God had called me to be a copywriter. I believe that God had called me to marry this woman. I believe that God had asked me to place my faith in him around my financial circumstances, around my relationships. And I was just like, man, I'm in an interesting position here. Like, I have nothing, but I also have everything. So again, kind of like rebound to a place where I'm like, okay, I have to hustle. I have to figure out how I'm going to make money. So I actually make a decision to send out a letter, like 100 letters filled with 6-sided die. This is a classic copywriting strategy from back in the day called Lumpy mail. So the idea is that you send something in the mail and it's like so odd looking that people are going to be like, what the heck is this? And of course they open it, and then whatever you end up putting in there is supposed to demonstrate that you can do something highly effective for them. And so I put a 6-sided die in there, and I send 100 letters out to a bunch of local and national nonprofits. I was like, nonprofits are always looking for money. They hire copywriters. I knew that. So maybe I could get one of these nonprofits to hire me in an effort to do a direct mail campaign or help them out with something. And the idea behind the die was like, hey, like, it's a roll of the dice whether or not you hire me. If you do, I'm going to promise you exceptional results in whatever capacity that, like, I can possibly deliver. The only thing that I didn't realize in this was that I was sending something that was thicker than the machines can roll at the USPS. And so I sent it with just a regular old stamp. I think that the postman had even told me, yeah, that's fine. You can send that with a regular old stamp. All of these 100 letters either don't deliver or they end up delivering with postage owed. So that's something that, like, if somebody sends you something without the correct amount of postage, you have to pay the money to receive it. So I get, like, I don't even know. I have no idea how many came back at this point, but at least 60 to 70% ended up going to the people, and they had to pay money to receive my direct mail package. And needless to say, like, that is not a really good way to win a client. Nobody's going to be happy about having to pay money to receive a solicitation. And so I get no clients from it. But more importantly was just, like, this idea that, like, I felt God had called me to take a risk on that. And I'm still broke. Just, like, again, at this point I'm doing kind of, like, whatever I can. I've got a few small little jobs. Like, I'm licking envelopes at an oil and gas company to put money, not actually physically licking them, but yeah, we got a device. I'm working for a moving company. I'm doing tree trimming, and at one point, like, I'm even about to go wait tables again, but I hear God telling me, don't do that. Like, you already know that you're not supposed to move in that direction. He's made that clear to me. And he's like, what I want you to do, and this was kind of based on some scripture that I was reading, was I want you to send double what the people would have had to pay to receive your letter to them. So I'd already invested like $150 in the letters and the dies. Then I find out, then I have to, then I invested some other amount on the postage. I'm sure stamps are like 40 cents then. So $40. And this is at a point in time where every single dime really matters to me. And then I realized, okay, so it costs $2 for these people to receive this. I sent 100 of these. That's $200 that people would have had to pay to receive my letters. So I'm going to go send out $400 to every single person that I had messed up on this sales campaign, and hopefully maybe something happens from this. So I do that, and again, like I think in sending $400 out like that plus the $40 in postage, I'm down to like another $100 in my bank account. And meanwhile, like I had just emptied the bank account too for the engagement ring, and I'm engaged, and I'm just like, how is this going to work out? Like I'm about to get married in 3 months and I have nothing. And here I am like just sending money to people,
just draining the bank
people
account
in the mail. I'm like, how crazy is this? So I do that. I don't end up getting a job, surprisingly. I was like, man, I just sent people $4. You'd think they want to hire me. I was shocked. But I remember making that move, and then all of a sudden things just started to click. Like I'm starting to get clients that I'm not seeking them at all. They're all coming from my mentor, but he's like, hey, I've got this overflow. Hey, I think that you need to meet this person. Hey, I think you need to meet this person. And I start to get enough work that I'm not only making enough money to keep my head afloat, I'm actually making, like, going into getting married. So this is like middle of 2014 to like the fall. I'm beginning to make more money than I've ever made, like, and even more money than I've ever made waiting tables. Which when I was waiting tables, like a good week, I would pull in probably close to $1,000, $1,200, because I was working in fine dining, so it was easy to make $300-400 in a night. And I'm starting to beat that just doing this copywriting stuff. And one of the most interesting things is how after I get married, I've got enough bills, but then we get hit with like a crazy dentist bill for 20 grand and a couple other things happen.
Good Lord.
And I'm just like, again, like just kind of struggling with like what is going on here. Like I feel like this yo-yo, or like I'm on a roller coaster. And my buddy Ryan introduces me to a guy who happens to be like, I don't know how many details I want to give here, but like I ended up working with him for a while. But when I had an initial conversation with him, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I actually know who this guy is, because the guy who was the real estate investor is friends with this guy. And right when he hired me, real estate investor guy hired me, he wanted me to write a package for a survival company, which is like, hey, my buddy here owns a survival company, and I want to do something like this because I think it's a really good idea. And so I interviewed with this guy. I was like, oh, that's that guy that we kind of like based our offer off of. And so I had to call the guy who fired me up and like kind of clear the air around why he fired me. And the point being is like I was hoping that like if this new potential client ends up like going through my references, he's like, oh, I'm going to talk to so-and-so. I wanted to make sure that he gave me a good review. And interestingly enough, he decided that he would. I think he just fought the unemployment just because like who doesn't want to pay, who actually wants to pay unemployment when, you know, you're thinking I made the right decision for my company.
Right.
So needless to say, like I ended up getting that business, and then it just keeps building, and I keep doing the thing where God would ask me to do things that just seemed crazy, like sending off $400 to people that you accidentally screwed up a mail campaign, and like just countless things like that kept happening. And so that's now 10 years ago, and I've continued to do those kinds of things where I'm just being tested, like, and every single year, not that it matters, but like it's at least something qualitative. My income has only gone down 1 year in the past 10 years. And it's because I've always just been like kind of going back to that premise of like, I believe God called me into this. Like he's asked me to be faithful. And especially with finances, that means trusting him with finances in a way that is counterintuitive to how the world works. And, you know, like even right now inside of our business, like we're experiencing things that are very similar to how I felt 10 years ago. And yet, like, I know that the call on my life to be able to provide for people financially is, or not for people, but just like, you know, to treat money like it's not really all that important is going to be the leverage that allows me to live a fulfilled life. And I'm super thankful for those opportunities that a lot of people wouldn't have gotten, or maybe wouldn't have taken action on. And I can't believe it worked out like that. Like, I can't believe sending out a 6-sided die and screwing up a mail package and then not getting any clients out of that, and then reimbursing them and still not getting any clients has produced a career that we're at right now, or that I'm at right now, and that, like, we're a part of. And I think it was a crazy business story. And, like, I continue to reflect back on it, like, just the arc of how work has worked out. Like, it was so non-traditional for me. I didn't go to school to get an MBA, to go work at a firm and then spend 30 years there. Instead, it's been like this absolute wild ride, and continues to be wild. So yeah, that was one of my crazy business stories. I don't know if you've got time to talk about one either.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't like any single one. I mean, I like how you just kind of gave a broad stroke of the journey. I mean, one, and thanks for sharing that. I mean, your story is pretty amazing. I mean, we could spend the entire podcast just talking about that, honestly. I mean, we could keep going in there more. So maybe that's something we could do today, or maybe we pick another day.
Questions,
when we actually
go.
go.
Want to just talk about it? That's fine, because it's one of my favorite stories. Like, my story, selfishly, is one of my favorite stories, just because I've seen the hand of God demonstrated in my life.
Yeah. Well, so before we go any further, like, do we have enough time to do that today? Because I know, because it really is like a pretty amazing story, and I don't want to apply any time pressure to that.
Yeah, maybe we continue it, because I think that both of us have some obligations right after this, and we can just do a part 2.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, stay tuned for part 2 of my story, or my business story, and like how I went from millions to billions to trillions. Or how I went from totally screwing up something and it actually turned out that it's working out better than I could have ever expected. And how, like, I think, how God, like, if you put your faith in God, like, things, even if they don't work out, you still have God at the end of the day. That's really what I would like. That's what I'll be circling back to anyways. But I think the story's pretty fun. So yeah, we can do that.